Good evening. It's just such a pleasure to be here. I just want to begin by first thanking the Dalai Lama Center for inviting me to be a speaker in this series, and really I'm so honored to be kind of the inaugural speaker in the speaker series for this season. So it's really such a pleasure to be here and share with you some of the information and latest science on this whole idea of social and emotional learning. But I thought I'd start with first asking some questions of you. So I guess Maria's usually the interviewer. I'm going to take on that role right now. How many of you are educators, are teachers? Wow, there's a lot. How many of you are parents? Wow, so there's a lot of balance. And then others, work in community, students, and all sorts of things. So it just gives me a sense of who's in the room. Now I want to say, did anybody wonder why did we choose social and emotional fitness as the way to describe this? And one thing, in thinking up a title for this, we really wanted to say, how could we communicate something that would really talk about the importance of what we need to do? And starting to think about that metaphor of fitness. You know, we know about physical fitness and the idea that we now know from research that people who are physically fit enjoy life more, they live longer, they're able to recover from injury quicker, they're able to be protected against even getting hurt as bad as they might. And what we know now from the science in the area of social and emotional learning, or social and emotional development, is that social emotional learning should be looked in the same way that we look at physical fitness. So we should look at social and emotional fitness, because guess what? The science now tells us that, in fact, if you have good social awareness, your ability to have good self-awareness, have good relationships, all of that helps protect you in the same way that physical fitness does. And it helps promote your resiliency. And what we know now is, in fact, in the same way you need to practice physical fitness every day and get your exercise and be able to go out there and have it not just a one-time deal, but over and over again, that you can, in fact, develop these skills of social and emotional fitness that will help you throughout your life. So in the next little while, I'm going to tell you about this whole idea of social emotional fitness. And the way we've sort of organized this is that I'm going to be up here for about 20 minutes or so. We'll see how it goes. And talk a bit about, have some PowerPoint slides and tell you about some of sort of the recent innovations in the research of why now? Why do we need to focus on this now? And then I'm going to go and sit in this chair, and Maria's going to come up and do her interview and interview me. And then we're going to leave the last half an hour or so for questions from all of you and see if I know. And I will tell you, well, Maria, who I've known for a long time, has described me as a human Google. So we'll see if it actually works, I guess, in the area of social and emotional learning. But I wanted to start out by, some of you might be saying, why has Kim spent her entire career, 25 plus years, trying to do research on this area of social and emotional learning and trying to understand how do we promote children's social and emotional well-being. And my own research for the last couple of decades has focused on a couple of key questions. How do we develop empathy, compassion, and altruism in children, and things like happiness and optimism? And it really started back years ago. So I'm going to just tell you a bit of a story of how did I become interested in that. There's lots of things that sort of sparked my interest, but it came back to really when I was a teacher. And when I was a beginning teacher, I first taught 7th and 8th grade, and then I started teaching at an alternative high school for at-risk adolescents. And at this time, it was for those children, or young people, really, I call them kids, but they were really young people, who, for whatever reason, left the regular school system. Typically, it was because of, they didn't stop going to classes, they were involved in drug and alcohol use, or they'd been psychiatrically hospitalized, a number of different reasons at this school. It was kind of a dumping ground. And the way I describe it, it was a group of kids, it was out a suburb of Chicago, who had tattoos before they became fashionable. And they often they did their tattoos themselves, actually. And I, as a beginning teacher, I was very enthusiastic. I came in and I was just like ready to, get them all interested. And they hated me. They just, they called me, it wasn't my name. And I went in there, and at first I was very disappointed, and I thought, what can I do? How can I involve them? And my initial impression was like, oh, these kids, this isn't something I've been meant to do. What should I do? And slowly, I first tried to reframe the situation for myself, and I thought, okay, if I was in their shoes, and I had spent my entire school career having teachers tell me, or either real or imagined, how dumb I was, how much of a loser I was, how I didn't belong in school. What would you do? The resilient thing to do is to protect yourself and not like the next teacher, is to push that teacher away, because that's another teacher who's going to break your heart and make you feel bad about yourself. So instead, I realized I have to engage them. They have to earn, I have to earn. They have to earn my trust, or I have to earn their trust. And so I started slowly doing things. I was the reading teacher, by the way, and there were no books in the school. Fascinating, isn't it? Because the person who organized the school said, one of the reasons kids drop out of school was because of all the books. It was very interesting reasoning at the time, but it had these, it was right when the computer age was starting. So I started out by just sort of finding out, what stuff do you like to read? I started bringing the newspaper. I started learning a bit about them. I'd just hear a little bit of a glimpse of something about them, and the next day I'd show up with a book like, well, I heard you talking to so-and-so that you kind of like these kind of books, and I thought, here, I just was thinking of you yesterday, and I thought you might like this. And then soon, lo and behold, I started doing some other things. So there were about 40 kids at this school. And so one of the things, this is just how naive I was, although maybe it was a good naive. We were having a parent-teacher night, and so I said, oh, you guys, we should have cookies. Who wants to come back to my apartment and make cookies for the parent-teacher night? They were so shocked, they came with me. And we went grocery, now a group of 5 of them all just came in my car, and we went grocery shopping and made cookies, snickerdoodles, I remember. And lo and behold, one of the moms came and said, there's no books here, and you're the reading teacher. Why don't you come or get some books from my library, the library. I work in a library, and people always donate books to libraries, I guess. And so I took a group of kids, and we got all of these books. And lo and behold, pretty soon, they were putting books up, and then I said, you guys, there's nothing on the walls. Let's see what we could put on the wall. So I got one of those magazines where you can order different posters and things, and they picked them out, and lo and behold, soon they were sort of like helping it make it their whole own place, and they were organizing. And then one day, Tim Lair, I just totally remember, their names are embedded, he comes over, and he's tall, 18-year-old boy who had like maybe 3 credits for high school. He was working on the GED. And he was kind of watching quietly, and he goes, Kim, my dad has a grocery store, and I work there on the weekends, and I noticed in the storeroom they have one of those racks that turn, that you could put paperbacks on, one of those sort of, and he said, I think that would look nice in here. You could put all those paperbacks instead of having them stacked up. I said, Tim, that would be amazing. The next day, here comes Tim, coming off with the book rack to add to the school. And lo and behold, in a short time, well, it's a long time, it felt, they started coming to school. They were really invested. In fact, one of the students, who I love, Paula, she had a picture, she drew a cartoon, she's a really good artist, and it said, I had me standing next to a student going, here, read this, and it said, Kim, the book pusher. And they sort of got me. So it was a wonderful experience until one day. So after about a year and a half, 2 years I was there. Actually, it was longer, 2.5. Amazing. Everybody was interested in this book program. The other schools, it was a private corporation that owned this. I got a call right before school started in August. And it was the director, and there was a larger boss. She said, so-and-so, Mr. So-and-so, came in and saw all the books that you had brought into the school and said, when he designed these schools, there were not to be any books, and you have to have your books out of there in 2 days and remove everything or you'll be fired. So I was heartbroken, but I was young, I didn't know what to do, I didn't have anything, and so I got in there and I got all the books out. I moved them. I was actually volunteering at a psychiatric hospital and sort of donated them. And then the question comes, what do I do the first day of school when the kids come to school? What do I say to them? And I had to be professional. I couldn't do anything. And so I just kind of said, well, we had to reorganize it, kind of very vague. And I left. I looked for another job that next month and left in 3 months. And it was actually devastating to the kids. Now, why I'm telling this story, because it's kind of a sad ending, I'm very sorry for that, is because back then, this is in the early 80s, we didn't have the research. At that time, I couldn't have gone to this leader, higher order principal, and tell him, here's this recent article that just showed that when you give children choice in the school, they're more likely to be motivated and have higher academic achievement test scores. Here is the information, the recent research study that shows that when you get children engaged in their own learning, they're more motivated. I had none of that science, and I had nothing in which to make my case. But all of you today are very lucky because we now do have the science and the research showing that these kinds of practices, creating a sense of caring in the classroom, involving students, having their voices, having them help be engaged in every level, actually helps all succeed in education. So what I'm going to do now is just tell you a bit about some of the most recent research of really looking at why now. Why now, in our time, do we need to start paying attention to promoting social and emotional learning in addition to academic achievement in school? And there's lots of research showing this. So I'm just giving you a little bit of a taste of some of the most recent innovations in the research of why now. So one of the things that we know is that children today have increased stress in all parts of their lives. And in fact, we know from recent research that stress actually can damage the brain. In a recent issue of Scientific American Mind, some of you might have seen it, it's this issue, October 2012. There's an entire section just on changing a child's mind. And one of the articles is by Clancy Blair that talks about stress in the brain. And what we know now from the research is that there's something, when we're stressed, there's a hormone that's released called cortisol. And this cortisol is sort of an indication of our stress levels. It's not a bad thing. I want to say we all have cortisol. We all need our cortisol. In fact, cortisol it peaks about an hour after rising and then dips down throughout the day. But what Clancy Blair and colleagues and other neuroscientists are finding is that too much cortisol can kind of flood the brain and do damage early on, especially children in poverty and children going under increased stress. And in fact, one of the places of the brain that it really does its most harm is called the prefrontal cortex, which is this front part right behind your forehead, which really is the most advanced part in terms of evolution of our brain development, and really helps us. It's responsible for planning and working memory and things like inhibition, being able to have self-regulation, which I'll talk to you in a bit. So this whole idea of increased stress is really doing harm to our children. Now, are children in British Columbia stressed? Are they experiencing the same type of hurriedness and pressure? And what the research is finding, we're doing some research on something called the Middle Years Development Instrument. The Middle Years Development Instrument is a measure of child well-being that we've developed at the Human Early Learning Partnership with Clyde Hertzman and Shelley Emel and a number of other colleagues, Martin Goon and Anna Ganderbin. And what we've found, it's a measure that asks children, 10-year-olds, fourth grade, children, and we're going to be piloting it with grade 7 actually, ask them to tell us in their voices how they feel about their life, their sense of empathy, optimism, happiness, but we also ask them about their worries. And we have a few questions where we ask them, how often are you worried about different things? We have 3 questions, worried about what's going to happen, do you have worries during the day? And what we found consistently, we've done the survey so far with over 7,000 children in British Columbia and find that about 30% of them say that they worry almost often or very often. So there's a number of children, even when you think like 10-year-olds, what do they have to be stressed about? There's a number of them experiencing significant stress. Now, why is stress important? What we know from the research is that stress is sort of one of the factors might lead up to things like anxiety and depression. And what we know from research is about 1 in 5 children have a diagnosable psychiatric disorder. 1 in 5. One recent study of 9 to 12-year-olds found that 37% of them had an identifiable mental health disorder. Now, what's so interesting is that only about 25% of those children get the help they need. Now I have to ask a question. Most of it emerges during the early school years. Of you who are teachers, how many of you, during your teacher preparation, had a course on mental health and mental illness in children? I don't see anyone's hand raised at all. How many of you have had a course on social and emotional learning in children? Not just one lecture in your educational psychology course. Now think about that. If teachers are the ones that are going to be on the sort of first line of identifying these kids, there's a mismatch here between how we're preparing teachers and what the problems are. Another issue that's happening, so there's stress and mental health problems. Another issue is the increasing loss of support that children are having in terms of their lives. So we know that children today, as compared to decades ago, are living in more isolated areas. Even though we have an increased population, we know that children don't have the extended family surrounding them as before. So for instance, some research I did a couple of years ago with United Way of the Lower Mainland found that, first of all, we looked at after-school time among children in Vancouver, actually 9 school districts in the Lower Mainland, 4th to 7th graders. And we asked them what they do after school and what they wish to be doing after school. And what we found was that during the after-school hours, about 50% of children go home and are by themselves or with maybe some other non-adult there. And what are they doing? Let me ask you, what do you think they're doing? Watching TV, computer. Well, you got it right, but when we did focus groups with the kids to find out, they said, you can't just ask us one question. You have to ask us we multitask. Because we have, in fact, we have the TV on, we have our computer, we have our iPod, we're texting, and we're on the computer, and then we have our homework books open too, by the way, and they're doing all of that. And so we find that children that they're not connected. Do you know what was so fascinating is when we ask them, what do you wish to be doing? Which, by the way, people rarely ever. In fact, it was the first study that we know of that actually asked children what they wish to be doing during the after-school hours. What we found is that 50% of them wanted to do sports. They wanted to be active. So here we have a group of children sitting on the couch in sedentary activities, and when you ask them what they want to be doing, they want to be active and be connected with others. They want to be with peer groups. And then you think about it, where's our society going? What time does school end? 3. What time does the workday end? Is there a mismatch there as well? And what we know now, according to Stats Canada, about 80% of moms of school-aged children are in the workforce. So there's a number of mismatches that are happening in our society, and where does that leave our children in terms of where they are, as well included in a loss of role models as well, and the idea of who are the adults that are so important for them. One of the things I'm giving you I don't know if this slide fits in here, I'll tell you. It's my favorite quote. It just had to insert it someplace. Because what we know from research on resiliency, what are the factors that promote children's well-being? The single most important factor, and you're going to hear me say this a few times tonight, I'll repeat it again and again, are relationships. Our children's relationships with their parents, non-related adults in school, non-related adults in the community, those adults who make a difference. And if you look at Yuri Bronfenbrenner's quote, which says every single child needs someone in his or her life who is absolutely crazy about them, you could see how important it is. Because what we find in research is that children who have one significant adult are able to overcome adversity. They're able to handle the stress in their life. They're able to manage these different things. So it's so important to think about this loss of support. And I just have to bring sleep in here, just because it's been a popular thing. I don't know, my house, Maria did mention that I have these 2 children that I can say their name. I think I have permission to say their name, don't I? Gray, who is 12, who's into the eye-rolling phase. And I don't know if anyone's got that. I'm so lame, just so you know right now. He would not understand why anyone would come and hear me talk, ever. Because I know nothing, just so you know. And Griffin, who's 15, and he's like coming out on the other side. But both of them are so sleep deprived. And children today, in fact, I heard a stat from Stuart Shanker that said actually that children today get 20% less sleep than a decade ago. And in our survey, our middle years development instrument, again, that measure that we asked them about nutrition and sleep, about 30% of children, when we asked them how many nights a week do you get a good sleep, 30% said 2 nights or less do they get a good sleep. Why are our kids not sleeping? What are some reasons you think? Texting. You know, they have their phone on next to their thing, and then people start texting. Technology. I have to say, I mean, I'm going to disclose maybe too much here. Oh, here's the camera. Okay. In our household, so I work, and my husband works, and we come home, and then we make dinner, and then there's homework, and by the time, we get everything all ready, it's like 10. And so it's just, and then of course we have to then get up early and everybody has to get going because we have to drop them off. And so just the pressure of parents to have to get everything all organized and things and, get us out of the home and everything. So it really is, I think children are sleep deprived, and I think their parents are also sleep deprived as well. I don't know if any of you are sleep deprived, but anyway, so it's an important thing to think about. And we also know that bullying is an issue, and I can't not talk about what we know now and not mention bullying. What we know is about 8% of children are bullied. There's different kinds of bullying. There's actually 4 kinds of bullying that occur that you have to really think about. There's the physical that actually decreases, that kind of peaks in, actually 2.5-year-olds are the ones who have the most physical aggression that kind of declines afterward. We know there's verbal bullying, but the type that are most insidious and the most toxic are something called social or relational aggression and cyberbullying. And social or relational aggression is the kind that you can't notice. It's the students who all of a sudden say, like, you can't, the subtle things. It starts happening, well, it happens early on in preschool, but around 4th and 5th grade, it really starts increasing among the girls, right? The sort of all the things, the exclusion and who can't be a part of it, and it's so toxic. And what we know from the MDI survey, actually, again, when we ask these grade 4 students, there are very low rates of physical bullying that they experience on a weekly, daily, or monthly basis or yearly basis, but it was social victimization, how they experience social bullying and not so much cyber. But we found that about 8 to 10% of children reported being bullied socially every week, and up to 70% reported at least once a month. So again, this is a concern we really have to address, and how do we prevent it? Because that's another one of the questions. We also know, my third thing, so we first have this idea of this increased stress and this other idea of loss of support in the relationships, the things that we know are protective factors. We now know that these factors about social and emotional learning, or how do you manage your stress, how do you get along with others, they're not just demanded for school and doing well in school, but for the workplace. We know now from other places that, in fact, what helps you be successful at work is not so much, you might have good academic achievement, but employers want to hire people who can manage their stress. So they won't take as many stress days. They want people who can get along with others, teamwork, things like that they really need to be successful. And this document, this Education for Life and Work, just came out July 15th, is now saying that these 21st century skills are really things like communication, critical thinking, and creativity, that those are the skills that we need to cultivate in our students and in our children, and not just the sort of typical cognitive skills. Interestingly, an aside here, well, it's not so much aside, Singapore. How many have heard of the country of Singapore? Okay, all of you. So Singapore always scores very high in academic achievement, always like off, in the international comparisons. However, several years ago, they were looking around, and because they're a small country and they don't have a lot of natural resources, their graduates have to leave. And so they had these employers coming back and going, your graduates are pretty smart, but really bad at working together and really not good at managing the stress. So the entire country of Singapore now has the explicit intentional focus on social and emotional learning, in addition to academic achievement. And this idea of it going around the world, so it really is something that people are saying, you need these skills. And finally, so I'm going to just ask you, I'm going to give you a bit of a quiz. Okay, you ready for your quiz? Okay. So Fortune 500, you've heard of them. they had a list. I got this from Diane Gosling, so I'm not sure exactly where the data are, but I'll just sort of put it out there. Had a list of all the employability skills. What were the skills you needed for employability? And they made a list 1970s and today. So we're in the 1970s, so go back. There's only a few of you that could go back that far, right? The 1970s, where do you think things like teamwork fit? Where would it be rated from a scale of 1 to 10? Teamwork is something in the 1970s that was needed. Okay. What about today? Oh, you guys are so smart. So there you go. So what you see is things like teamwork, problem solving, interpersonal skills, oral communication. The top 3 basically have been reversed from 1970 to now. So this idea of what are the skills that we need are these skills about getting along, these social and emotional learning skills, this self-awareness, social awareness, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and self-management are the things that are needed now. And so we really need them more than ever before. So what we're doing now, and is before we, Maria and I are going to be in dialogue here, and I want to sort of give you a bit of a foreshadowing. We really are moving as a society away from a focus on ill-being and the idea of figuring out what to do to help people actually come out of mental illness, but how do we promote positive well-being? What are the ways that we help cultivate these positive human qualities and these things that are going to be long-lasting to help us be successful in school and life and help us have sort of be able to recover from problems and be able to do well in the future? Thank you.